This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
What's up?
Hey.
How are you?
I am good. We've had Andrew Mason here on just about every episode so far. And now he's the one ducking out this week. So
he said he'll be here. So he's just going to roll in at some point and scare us all.
Yeah, he's going to pull the Kramer, but on a podcast. Just like bust out the door.
Oh, man. What's new since last week?
I don't know. I feel like I've been just super distracted with the election this week. It's been a roller coaster for sure.
Have you been following it?
Yeah, like pretty regularly. I hadn't found this until just an hour ago, but there's a GitHub repository that we'll paste this in the show notes, but it is polling a New York Times private API to get all of the bunches of votes that are being posted kind of in real time. It's showing you all of those where like Arizona was updated 38 minutes ago, 28 minutes ago, 8 minutes ago. This is how many votes remain, all that stuff. It's been pretty cool to like see that, because that was the thing that like all of the election news sites are just, here's where it's at. And we're going to refresh in 10 seconds and it's going to be exactly the same as it was. You'll just keep doing this. This is more looking at the raw data, which I think as a programmer is a lot more fun to look at, you know, because I want to know the outstanding votes. And it's interesting to look at that and think about the counties that are left to collect are trending one way or the other. And that's what you want to see right now as it gets close. What is the difference between now and then? So it's kind of cool. Anybody can take a look at that. But yeah, you know, it's been quite a roller coaster. It felt like it was super close. And then now it's trending towards Biden. And it's definitely amazing to see the way that they're tabulating the votes, like the mail-in ones in some places get counted last. And they're so significantly different. It's not like they're even like the regular, like in-person voting. I mean, there's been lots of talk about mail-in voting fraud and whatever. So I can see why that is trending one way more than the other or whatever. But it's been interesting to watch all this. And, you know, there's so many developers building tools and whatever behind the scenes for the news outlets. It's crazy.
I was thinking about that specifically, like even going to CNN, it's so interactive and it updates like every 10 seconds. Like you can hover over a state and it like, these people are like the real heroes. Like these devs that like, maybe they're just not in the circles I hang out in. They seem to just be like heads down, like doing their job. So shout out all our journalist developers.
Yeah, they're very, very busy right now, I'm sure. Because early on election day, I know CNN was going down quite a bit because you'd get like a cache message or whatever that it would just be a little string of text instead of the whole page. And it was kind of funny to see that. But I'm sure that they have some pretty epic stuff there. They can cache stuff for 10 seconds or whatever.
Right.
You know, their cache cannot be long-lived. It's definitely interesting to think about all that stuff where you're like pulling for this data and I don't have any concept of what happens behind the scenes. Like this unofficial New York Times API, they like reverse engineered it, probably watching, you know, the AJAX requests in the browser or whatever. What is actually happening between the states counting the votes and reporting that? Who are they reporting that to? And how do all these places get these numbers? That's kind of interesting. There's a lot of that behind the scenes. Like, is it somebody doing data entry or a bunch of people doing data entry that like get a phone call or whatever that's, hey, it's Nevada. We got 10,000 new votes. X% is this, whatever.
Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could totally be manual like that. So I'm really curious about that. It's kind of fascinating.
I kind of don't understand. Maybe I'm just super naive, but like how we are like the most technologically advanced we've ever been and voting like in one of the most like advanced countries and voting is just a nightmare. I mean, Not everywhere. It was really easy. I voted election day and it was really easy, but why? Maybe because we're programmers. Why is there not some kind of system for this? Like, I understand there's like fraud and stuff like that, but is there not fraud happening everywhere with it? I don't know. It's mind boggling.
Yeah, it's hard to know, what without seeing what's going on. It's hard to know. And I know they talk about they want you to use Sharpies and pens and stuff so it doesn't smear and whatever. And I'm sure there's a lot of those things that like make the paper ballots a lot harder. But yeah, it's also crazy, that seems to be still the most reliable thing. Like, we'd rather not rely on computers because we don't want someone making a tiny mistake and then screwing this whole thing up. If it's a security thing or whatever, it's just so much harder to lock that down than paper ballots or whatever.
I was really nervous. I thought early voting went till Friday. So I was like getting ready to leave the house and I got online. It was like ended Thursday and I was like very upset. But I was like, I'll go Tuesday. Like, work super accommodating. Got myself all amped up. Like, I even dressed up and I walked to where I voted. And it took me 3 times as long to walk there and back as to actually vote. And I walked through, there was no line. We had a little electronic machine. I did that. And then it probably took me longer outside to talk to the local paper than to actually place my vote. And so, so all said and done, it took me 40 minutes. So it didn't end up being too bad.
That's pretty awesome. I stood outside for like 2 hours. We pulled up to, what was it? 6 o'clock, I think is when we got there, when it opened. And it was at a high school and we park, the parking lot's full and the line is going around the building. And we're like, okay, we'll go get in line. And we get to the corner of the building and then we're like, uh-oh, the line goes all the way down that side too. So we walk down there and it's all the way around the other side and back on the 4th side of the building. So we stood outside for 2 straight hours, maybe more like an hour and a half or something. But it was a long, but I'm happy that people were out voting. I think that's the important piece.
Do you have early voting, Missouri?
No, I don't think so. We do a lot of stuff the old school way.
So like Memphis is right on the border of Arkansas and Mississippi. So my parents live in Mississippi and they don't do like official early voting. My mom went and early voted and they're like, you have to give a reason. And she's because I'm 75. And they were like, okay, cool. Well, so it just feels like it makes no sense. But Tennessee does early voting. And in Shelby County, where I am, at the end of early voting, 96% of the total of everyone who voted in the last election had early voted. So it was, I don't know what the official numbers ended up being, but I'm just hoping, without getting like political, I just hope that things kind of chill out soon.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to like some unity, a little less outrage. So
100%. I mean, it's just like exhausting. It's a big distraction to be thinking about constantly. And like at the same time, COVID cases are going crazy right now. And so my sister got it a while ago and she works for a hospital and she had to take patients to appointments and things. And she still to this day can't smell food without it smelling rancid. And it's like a common symptom of it. So she's not like, she got pretty sick when she had it, but then this has been lingering for maybe a couple months now where she cannot eat food in general. Sweets and bread and things don't smell bad to her. We went and ordered Mexican. Everything smells awful. She's got to hold her nose closed to go eat food. It's crazy. So with the number of cases going insane right now, it's just one of the election officials in our neighborhood tested positive, still worked the election and died after it. And so they exposed countless people that were voting. It's just nonsense. Yeah, it's a pain. I'm just ready to relax again, but it feels like everything is always keeping you on edge.
Oh, yeah.
It's been a long year. But we have good news on the horizon. Ruby 3 and Rails 6.1 are coming out soon.
The saviors of 2020, DH8s and Mats.
We finally have something to look forward to, right?
Yeah, maybe. Do you think Rails 6.1 will get out of release candidate stage before the end of the year?
Gosh, I hope so. But then thinking back to last release, I'm like, ooh, I would really hope so. I think if we'll have to look through some of this stuff too, but like in theory, most of these are not going to have as much of regressions as last time, because like last time was such a big thing that Eileen did for the multi-database support, which is like probably the hardest part of Rails, the active record and database things, just easily the most complicated. And since you got the majority of that done, these are just kind of enhancing it to do horizontal sharding and stuff. So I think in theory, it can get released faster because there should be less regressions and things that crop up. But yeah, I really hope it doesn't take too long. I was a little disappointed to hear the announcement, but have no word on Turbolinks 6 and Stimulus. In theory, like Turbolinks doesn't really depend on any server-side stuff, but it does in the Rails scaffolds, right? The Turbolinks Rails gem overrides the redirect to method in order to look if it's a Turbolinks request. And if it is, then it will issue a JavaScript Turbolinks visit instead of a browser visit. So I was expecting, that scaffold generation stuff to change a bit for the error handling in the scaffolds that we'll get out of the box. And since that didn't happen, I think the release candidates are kind of the cutoff for new features. So it seems like we may not get that for Rails 6.1, which kind of bums
agree.
me out.
I mean, the main branch of Turbolinks hasn't been updated since May.
Yeah.
But Dependabot's in there doing work.
And Stimulus has had a couple tiny bug fixes, right? But nothing major.
Yeah. I mean, I said, I don't remember which one of you was on that day, but I said that I didn't think that Stimulus or Turbolinks would get released or Rails 6.1. And now it's looking maybe Rails 6.1, but I agree with you, Chris, to a degree. I think there are a lot of changes in here. And I am like, okay, well, how many of these changes are people going to upgrade their apps to try it out? And if so, will they discover problems? But on the plus side, GitHub and Shopify and Basecamp have been using it. So that gives me hope.
I'm curious your thoughts on when this new Hey technology comes out, which would also be cool to have a real name for it so we can stop saying these code names. We should come up with our own code name for it. Let's do that now.
I was literally about, thank you. Yes.
Let's do it. So what version of Turbolinks are we on now? 5?
We are currently on 5.2.
So we're looking at Turbolinks 6. This came out of Hey.
Well, 5.3.0 -beta 1 came out on March 11th, 2019.
Call it Turbo Man. From the hit Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Jingle All the Way. You might be too young for that one, Andrew.
I was like, damn it. More movie jokes. Great.
All right. Turbo Man. So I'm curious how that is going to affect the adoption and the use of StimulusReflex. Because I know they're different. Well, we assumed them to be different, but one comes out of the box and one doesn't. I mean, that hasn't really affected things like RSpec, but I'm just curious y'all's thoughts on that.
StimulusReflex has a big head start. I think if anything else is worth noting, Nate messaged me the other day and said they're still growing. There's a couple like people who blogged about it recently who apparently had clout. And I was like, but their names aren't Jason and Chris. And so I was confused, but apparently they had clout before I was around. And Nate was pretty excited about that. So I think if anything, I don't think the rate at which people will use StimulusReflex will drop, but I doubt it will keep growing as fast. But you also have to consider there are a lot of people who write Rails who have no idea that StimulusReflex exists. So
Totally.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see, because I feel like, the cable ready side of things will be such a perfect pair to Turbolinks, Turboman. Yeah, I mean, even Turbolinks is a name, because we saw in the gem file from Hey that it was their repo is called Turbo, and if they're going to handle forms and stuff, it's not just links anymore. So maybe it's just Turbo now. But yeah, the WebSocket stuff, it's got its downsides, right? Because you're doing the WebSockets, you can't modify the cookies in session and stuff as easily. And that's been a struggle to work around. So if Turbolinks 6 is going to, stick with AJAX requests for things, then it'll be interesting. The WebSocket stuff may be slightly faster because your connection's still open. But if you're using HTTP 2 and the connection's just open in general, then it's not as necessary, and it simplifies things, I think. But then, the cable ready side of things, which I've been more drawn to than StimulusReflex, that is not going to be less valuable. It may be more valuable, because it fits so well with either approach, right? You can push updates from the server, and that's the beautiful piece of that. Handling forms and links and whatever. StimulusReflex and Turbolinks are effectively doing the same thing with just different transport protocols. So, I don't see a huge difference between them. And the big benefit to me is use either one of them with cable ready, so you can push, if you're importing a CSV, pump those updates up to the progress bar from cable ready. That stuff makes you're not pulling anymore. You just have a very simple way of handling that stuff. And I did the cable ready kind of approach from scratch in Hatchbox. And the really nice part is that cable ready, here's all these regular DOM operations. I was building my own kind of custom thing that was using those DOM operations, but they were more specific to each little feature. And the genericness of it that maps one-to-one it's key. It's so nice. So that's kind of where I sit on it right now. I don't really care which one you use. I feel like StimulusReflex being on WebSockets makes it tougher because of the cookie issue. That my guess would be that the Turbolinks approach with frames and other things is probably going to be easier and simpler for that piece.
I think cable ready is like you said, the sweetest part of the whole deal, right? Because we got down into some raw cable ready stuff at Podia, and we weren't just limited to their DOM operations either, because cable ready has the thing where you can broadcast JavaScript events to the DOM. Then we could write our own custom event listeners. And so it's even if this thing doesn't exist, we have the full power of the JavaScript event system. And full disclosure, I'm super pro StimulusReflex. Obviously, I'm still working on my course and stuff. But the WebSocket thing it's not super terrible because of Action Cable. But I think there's a pull request that's been open for a while in StimulusReflex about changing the transport system. I look at Laravel Livewire, and it uses just AJAX to do that kind of stuff. And I know AJAX isn't a very sexy technology, but it's a pretty reliable technology. And so I'm interested to see if that is the thing that Turbo uses, then I don't know. I'm just interested to see how that performs and how it works, because in my head, it's a little bit simpler. And even if StimulusReflex adopted as a transport layer, it is a little bit simpler because there's one less dependency, right?
Yeah. Did you guys see that joke on Twitter that I forget who posted it? It was maybe Nate Berkopec, that who else is refreshing the page because they're not sure the WebSockets are still connected on the voting election results. I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh, no. I think it's also something that y'all didn't really touch on, but I don't think should be ignored, is that the messaging around Turbolinks has never been as good as it could have been. And a lot of people, like when I started writing Rails, Turbolinks was like Satan. Like everyone I heard was like, dude, turn Turbolinks off. It's screwed. Like blah, blah, blah. So a lot of people, I think, are going to continue to think that regardless of, kind of the advances we made. And I think that's just because the messaging around it wasn't as good as it could have been, or maybe there was a lot of disconnect prior to that. I don't know. To me, it makes sense what's going on. You're trying to attach stuff to the global window, and that's not kosher anymore. And honestly, that's not how people are writing software now anyway. So if anything, I think that change kind of helped push a lot of people in the Rails community forward where they might not have been. But the messaging around it has never been that stellar. So if this does come out and the messaging is once again not that stellar, I think if anything, StimulusReflex will gain flight.
Yeah, I agree. That was the biggest flaw with Turbolinks and honestly Stimulus too. To an extent, they had a lot more documentation than Turbolinks ever did, but Turbolinks came out at a time where everybody used jQuery. That's all everyone used. And we were getting into the let's let JavaScript control a lot more. And there was no easy path for people to convert their jQuery stuff to Turbolinks compatible code, which is still kind of a problem today. But I think people build better embeddable JavaScript widgets that have a setup and a teardown. Because a lot of times, you might grab the intercom JavaScript to embed that, and then it embeds it, and then there's no way to tear it down if you need to on a Turbolinks event or something. Like that was a major problem. I remember having, some video embed that I did on GoRails. When I added Turbolinks, the video would be playing and you would click to go back to a different page and the video would continue playing even though it wasn't visible anymore or on the screen or anything. And it was stuff like that was like, Turbolinks is a huge, huge pain. But the thing is, now that React and Vue and Svelte and everything else are out there, those all deal with the exact same issues. So people have gotten a lot better at writing JavaScript that can work with this stuff, which is good. But yeah, it's that I think is the biggest trouble is there was not near enough help to document that, to explain how to do it right. Because a lot of people are just like, I know how jQuery works, and as long as I wait until the DOM's ready, we're good. And it's a lot more complicated now. And we didn't talk about that near enough. And part of that too, I think, is it's harder to contribute docs to Rails than it would be to contribute to StimulusReflex or Cable Ready or whatever. There's more effort dedicated to making the docs really good. And that more of that gets merged in. And that helps an enormous amount. And I feel like Rails has kind of been us waiting on Basecamp to do stuff for quite some time with not a lot of feedback, not a lot of changes, not a huge amount of activity. And that does not help.
I want to actually touch on something even deeper that you just said, and it's about people contributing to docs. I find StimulusReflex less intimidating to contribute to as a whole. I don't know if it's just because Rails and Turbolinks, they're big and they're the official thing, but I found it really easy to get involved in the StimulusReflex community, the Discord. I felt very welcomed. And I'm not saying that the antithesis is that Rails is not that way. I'm just speaking to how solid of a community it is in Reflex. I opened pull requests that I thought would be stupid, and people were really welcoming and offered advice and ways to make it better. Really, us adopting Reflex at Podia, we were successful doing that because we got so much support from Nate, from Leastbad, from all these people, from Andrew.
I'm going to toot my own horn, dude. I thought about saying I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do it. And Nate, because at the very beginning of StimulusReflex, when it was basically me and him, and then very early on, Leastbad came, Nate and I, we talked a lot about community building and how we wanted to build it and how we wanted to get people involved and how we wanted to get them interested and how we wanted to keep them interested. And I am going to toot my own horn because the Discord was me. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to do discourse. And I was firmly like, no, if we want to build a real community, we need chat, but not chat that disappears like Gitter. So yeah, no, we freaking tried hard, dude. We worked at that. We actively sought to build the community. It wasn't an afterthought. And I think it shows now. And like now I'm not as active, although I'm about to be getting a lot more into it. And I'm excited to get back because the community is, I think we did a lot of work up front to make sure that, you know, we were keeping toxic people out. If someone tried to cop an attitude, we were like, no, this is the way it is. And we tried to keep it as open and inclusive as possible. And we hammered down on people who weren't. And, you know, obviously we're two people and we can't force people to do anything, but we were vigilant and we wanted people to contribute and we wanted to encourage them. And that's also kind of like a lot about what makes Nate such a great developer, person, friend, mentor, is that he really is big on encouraging contribution. And he has like a focus on taking a step back and letting someone else carry like he doesn't need to carry the torch to the finish line like I've seen from other people. He wants someone else to do it. He wants to like get them to the point where they can cross the finish line and then watch them as they do. And I think, you know, this speaks a lot to him and his character and, you know, what he's accomplished.
100%. 100%. I think that's the most encouraging piece of it all and why people are so excited about StimulusReflex is it's, you know, everybody's very excited about here's a new way we can do things that makes Rails more modern without all of the nonsense of the JavaScript world. And that community, it changes in Rails kind of as it's been owned by Basecamp. And now they're super busy with, they're not needing, you know, to contribute stuff back as much because they've got Basecamp and Hey, and they're focused on some heavy things that they've got to do. So, you know, the people who can spend more time doing the open source work are what keep the community going. And we need more of that. And I feel like that's held Rails back a bit, which is kind of why people are saying it's dead or whatever. It just doesn't get as involved with the community as it probably used to when they were figuring things out in the earlier days.
I don't know. I have a weird view on it because I came in a lot later, which is also why I have a very distorted view about a comment that I do want to go back to in a second. But Rails is an established thing. They don't have to do that anymore. I mean, people can say that Rails is the D word all they want. It doesn't matter. It's not. It's powering multi-million-dollar companies. And yes, no, I don't want to say that. I want to like end that term. I think it like inherently sows this weird, I don't want to say toxic idea. To people who don't know that we're joking, they hear that and maybe the only thing they've ever heard about Rails is someone making a joke that Rails is dead. And I think it's a problem, honestly.
I gave an entire conference talk at RubyConf 2017. It was kind of pushing back against the Ruby and Rails is dead mantra.
Yeah. And I've started to kind of say a little bit more about this, especially on Twitter, when people are like very well known and well followed who are making these jokes. People don't know that these are jokes, just like in some other more toxic areas of the social sphere. People who didn't know that things were jokes took them way too far. And we ended up with problems. And that's why I'm obviously not comparing the two. I'm just like, words matter. And if we want to keep Rails awesome and not have that kind of rhetoric, because I think like I saw after GitHub got pwned because people were upset about YouTube DL. One of the comments on Hacker News like literally just pissed me off because it was like, oh, well, it's just Rails. Of course, it's not secure. Our jokes, I feel like, kind of contribute to that idea because someone who has never written Ruby is not going to just think Rails is dead or slow or insecure. Someone in the Ruby community is saying that and they're hearing it. So that's my 2 cents on that. And also to take us back a second, if we can, Chris, when you were talking about how Turbolinks made these changes and now a lot of jQuery plugins broke. Number one, Those jQuery plugins were 10 years old. All right. We get a new JavaScript framework every 3 days. So I was in like a weird place because I didn't know jQuery. I still don't. I don't know jQuery. I can't write jQuery right now off the top of my head. And I know it really gave rise to the quote unquote power of JavaScript. And we all are indebted to it. Well, maybe indebted to it. I don't know about that. I think if anything, it's like the community kind of seemed in my mind when I looked at it from more of a step away from it, is that the people who were making us think about it, to me, were people who were digging their heels in. And they're like, I don't want to change. I don't want to have to learn how to do this. I want to keep using this jQuery plugin from 2003. And it's like, dude, that's just not how it goes. Not to insinuate that's what you were saying, but I have heard that sentiment before. And it's like, oh, well, Rails is changing and now we're having to do this Webpack stuff and Webpack sucks. And yeah, it does suck, but we can't do that stuff anymore. That's not the way. The JavaScript community has evolved a lot. And you can't just say, I want to keep using JavaScript tools that were written 10 years ago, because JavaScript has advanced significantly from that.
Sure. Yeah, no, I don't disagree. It's just that if you join a community where everything's broken because people are like adopting this new tool, it's really hard to get excited about that community. And like Turbolinks 1 was like 8 years ago or more now. And like JavaScript was a totally different place back 8 years ago or more. And so there was just not the tooling or anything around the JavaScript community back then. So people were doing things with all the assumptions of, we will load our JavaScript library and that's it. When the page gets refreshed, the browser will redo that. And if you're going to change a fundamental like that, you've got to have enormous amount of docs and support and things for that, which is like a good example of what's happening right now. We have a new approach for handling forms and, all kinds of things with StimulusReflex, and the community sprung up to support that and teach people how to do it, and also learn how to solve problems in that new way. Because if you're building something like Turbolinks or you're building StimulusReflex, there's a lot of situations you don't know how to handle, because you can handle your original use cases, and over time you see people using it for different things that you've never tried before and they don't work, and you need to go and figure out solutions to those. And that's what we didn't get a whole lot of with Turbolinks in the early days, which is why people just threw it away. And that adoption really failed kind of hard for a long time. But when Stimulus came out, you can write a wrapper around your jQuery stuff pretty easily, or any library, and you don't have to even think about Turbolinks anymore, which is like, oh, this is refreshing. Maybe Turbolinks is not as bad as it used to be, because we are no longer forced to think about those nuances and details. We can just use a Stimulus to take care of a lot of that for us. And that's something like browsers have gotten better. Developers have understood that mutation observers are better than event listeners for a lot of things and whatever. So I feel like, there's been a lot of learnings, but this has been a 8-year process. And yeah, it wasn't great for the first 4 or 5 years or whatever. And it's really picking up now, but it's not an easy task. And I think this goes to your point of the community and the docs and the help around these things are like the main reason why any of this stuff is successful. In the early days of Rails, the very beginning, you had so many people getting involved, and conferences where, GitHub's building stuff in Rails. So they're helping people, and they're building. At one point, they had Ruby Forge support to publish packages on GitHub or whatever. I remember seeing that in college, I guess. That was a super long time ago. And yeah, there's just so much that is required to make, major changes in a community successful. And we kind of botched the Turbolinks one, I think.
Right.
But we've learned so much that hopefully that doesn't happen again.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's why I said earlier, the messaging around Turbolinks has been poor in the past. I wasn't there for that. That was something that Nate talked a lot about, the early days of StimulusReflex, how he didn't want that to happen. And to be fair, like, I'm not a documenter. And if you know me, you know that I don't do that whole, oh, well, now I should actually maintain this thing. And Nate is more of a builder like me as well. Most of the documentation success is from LeasePad. And I want to give him that credit because he worked really hard on a task that no one wanted to do. And I'm also just really super jaded about the jQuery plugin thing. There was several weeks in CodeFun where I was trying to add this stupid jQuery plugin and it wasn't working. And I had never once was like, oh, this is because of Rails or this is because of Turbolinks. I was like, because this is a crappy old library. And yeah, it really makes me angry. that was a very angering time. It's just really annoying and frustrating. And you're like, well, how can I try to rewrite this? And it's what is even going on here? I'm really angry now thinking about it.
That was such a hard thing to do because everything was built as jQuery plugins. But over time, JavaScript's a whole different language than it was 8 years ago too. And browsers are way better. And you were stuck using jQuery because that was the only way to make a lot of the stuff work cross-browser without a whole lot of manual debugging in each browser. And that was worth it at the time, but it was such a weird transitional phase. Every Stack Overflow post and every library you tried to find to use a calendar picker, it was always jQuery. And so then if you wanted to add those and the tutorials used to show how to use that, and now you can't use it in Rails with Turbolinks, it just got to be really frustrating because there wasn't a whole lot of people you could talk to and see how do I convert this to make it compatible. So it's such a hard thing to do to make those fundamental changes in a community. And I'm impressed with how things are moving on Webpacker because that is a massive, massive change. And it's still got tons of flaws or whatever, but that is a complete re-understanding of how JavaScript works in your apps these days.
And I want to add on to that real quickly and just say, I'm not going to explain why. I've written a lot of Webpack config, like literally webpack.config.js recently. And it's really bad. It's insanely bad. And I think that the people who are complaining about Webpack have absolutely no idea how much they're protecting you. And this is kind of like my question to y'all, because for me, as someone who's younger and who's like coming into this, like after a lot of this big stuff has already happened, I see it as like Rails developers, some of them, not all of them, obviously, are trying to dig in their heels and they're like, no, we don't want to change. Like to me, as someone looking onto it, we don't want to change. We don't want to learn how to use Webpack. We don't want to do this. We don't want to migrate from jQuery and this and that. And so that was kind of like my question to y'all is like, do y'all think that? Or am I just seeing like a skewed version? Because I'm on Twitter and Twitter is a bunch of bedwetters, honestly. You know, and they're complaining everything.
My perspective on it is I have a job to do. I need to go build this thing. And if I'm going to waste a few weeks getting something up and running where I know how easily I could have done it the old way, because I've already done it the old way, that is really frustrating. So, I think that's the thing that you're fighting is you have tutorials and everything that you can use for the old approach. And it's easy. It's the tradition. You know how to do it. Everybody can help you with that. But the new way is like, okay, all the stuff that I used to understand, I have to relearn. It's like when I learned how to drive manual in a car, and that was the most frustrating feeling I've had in a long time because I couldn't make a left turn. I couldn't put it in gear on a hill. And, I would like stall in the middle of an intersection and freak out. People were honking at me and whatever. And it's that feeling, I think, where it's, I know how to do this, but now I can't because things are different and I don't understand it yet. And you just want to be able to jump right back to, with a new tool, you want to get as quickly as you can to that old productivity again. And it takes so much time. And I think that's why people fight it.
Yeah. I mean, I have mixed feelings on it. I think a lot of the country kind of like is in that mindset. Like, oh, well, this thing that we wanted to do where we mined coal, not wanted to do, but we're wanting to mine coal. And we're like, no, we're not doing that anymore because the earth might explode. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. It's weird to see like larger national trends and like feelings kind of like percolate down through certain communities in certain ways.
Yeah. The other part of this too, though, is like you have that you're fighting against, that feeling, and you need some reason that you must overcome that. Where it's, look, you can yarn install any package. Boom, you're done. That is so much easier than like the Rails assets gem wrappers that were complete garbage because they never had any documentation on what file to import or what was even in there. And it was just like, okay, I guess we'll just copy the source code into our vendor JavaScripts folder and hope that we'll maintain that. And then someone will go edit that when they shouldn't have. And, you know, it became like a giant mess the old way. So the Webpacker approach, I think, has so many benefits, but you have to also see those at the same time to know that, okay, it's going to be a little bit hard to migrate and learn this new thing, but we're going to get these benefits, and these old problems that we fought with are going to hopefully be solved in a better way. And, you know, there has to be a balance of that so that you can tempt people with that new thing, that new approach. And even if they're going to have trouble migrating to that, it's got to have enough of a benefit for them to be excited about it. I feel like that's something that you see happening in StimulusReflex, and it may be taken for granted, but because of the hype there, everybody's like super excited to use it. If they've got to learn to reinvent the wheel to do the exact same thing in StimulusReflex that they were used to doing with an AJAX request before, then they don't realize that they're frustrated trying to get there. They're like, cool, I'm open to it. I'm excited about it. And you have a different mindset when you're learning something like that, where you're so excited about it. When you're being forced the JavaScript change from the asset pipeline to Webpacker, you're like, I don't know if I get any benefits out of this. I just know it's a huge pain in the butt. And that is not great. And I feel like you felt the exact same thing with Turbolinks and moving from the asset pipeline to Webpacker. There wasn't enough of a clear benefit to make it, oh, yes, let's learn this. Let's figure it out. Let's document it well and whatever. But I think that's what you see in StimulusReflex. It was done in a way that made it so that people, yeah, okay, it doesn't handle cookies right now very well. How do we go fix that? As opposed to, screw this thing. It doesn't handle cookies. This is stupid. I'm going to do it the old way. Why would I upgrade to that? You end up with just the opposite mentality, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah. And something that you kind of didn't explicitly say there is that when I'm using StimulusReflex, I'm like, holy crap, I could build all this super cool stuff with this. I could build a business that's doing this. All of a sudden, all these ideas that I have are now within reach because I can do all the super cool stuff that I've been seeing and thinking about. And it's super cool and I'm excited. And you absolutely will not feel that feeling when you freaking add, like finally get your CSS to correctly compile and to the correct location. Like it's just not going, you're not going to be building super dank cool stuff with CSS on JavaScript. Well, I mean, yeah, I said it. Never mind. I'm going to own up to that. I said that. And I think it's a very different feeling. And I think that's kind of important to kind of highlight that you may hit some problems, but you can almost immediately see the power of StimulusReflex and Cable Ready. Eric showed me something in Cable Ready last night. It literally blew me away. I was like, this is sick. This is awesome. I haven't like looked at something, looked at the web and been like, this is freaking cool in a long time. And that's what it feels like. You're not going to feel like that getting your freaking JavaScript to correctly go through the right Babel plugins and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. I think that's the big difference is like, you know, okay, our page loads a tiny fraction faster using Turbolinks. Whoop-de-doo. You know, okay, that's great, I guess. But, you know, the original promise with Turbolinks was like, boom, you have your Rails app, it's faster, and you get the iOS and Android versions of it out of the box. Boom. And that's appealing. But then there was problems and like the Android version was deprecated and stuff. So hopefully And that actually may be one of the big reasons why they're not ready to release that. It may be the mobile stuff or Electron or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, like it needs to be, it's like that. I don't love this, but the common saying of your new thing needs to be 10 times better than the old thing to replace it. And it does feel that way sometimes. You need something compelling that is actually, wow, that would have been such a pain to do the old way. Where StimulusReflex is, okay, if I wanted to do these things, real-time form validations, you got to go build Ajax submit, and then your client-side validations need some JavaScript and a response from the server, and it's wiring up a lot of stuff manually. Whereas with StimulusReflex, it feels instant, and you didn't have to write any code, and just because it's re-rendering that form, and it's wow. Okay, that's pretty cool. And that does feel like the pain that you used to have, and now you get this feature for free. And that's compelling.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in this and why I wanted to know what y'all thought, particularly because I think this JavaScript community is about to go through another big upheaval. And I've been saying this for a few months and it's starting to come true. I've been talking about Snowpack. Probably not on here, but I've been talking to Snowpack with people for a while. I think it's super cool. And I've been thinking that. And Svelte the other day announced that they're moving completely over to Snowpack. Yesterday, for the first time probably in my entire life, I did something in JavaScript, stood back from the computer and was like, holy crap. That is not just 10x faster. That's 100x faster, 150x faster. I took a 10-second compile time of JavaScript and did it in 0.2 seconds with Snowpack. And I think really once you kind of get down into, if you don't understand Webpack now, or at least you haven't tried to, you're only going to continue being at a disadvantage, which is why I'm kind of like harping on, is this people digging in their heels because they're going to get continually left and we're going to continually get this bad rap of, oh, it's an old framework. They're living in the past. But there are people who are doing super cool stuff. I mean, Bridgetown is an example of that. Connor Rogers is working on Snowpacker to bring Snowpack to Rails. And the Snowpack team has also gotten behind him on that. And that's really exciting to see because I can tell you right now that Webpack is screwed. It's completely and utterly screwed and it makes no sense and it's impossible to navigate and it's hard. It really is hard to wrap your mind around what's going on, why it's going on. Why do I need to add this? And why do I need 17 freaking node packages to run ESLint? And, what is this even doing? Like it's slower than the asset pipeline and this and that. And Snowpack is not like that. It's dramatically faster.
I wouldn't use Webpack if it wasn't given to me in Rails.
Agreed.
I also think that type of complexity like Webpack is part of the reason JavaScript gets such a bad reputation. There's other things, but I've been doing a lot of React at work, but I haven't been doing like single page app React. I'm just building like little components. And you know what? They're easy to test. They're really simple to understand. They integrate with Rails nicely. And Leasebad encouraged me to write a boring React article. And I might do that. But like, I think for me, I need to see the things like Snowpacker and things like that, because I almost feel guilty using JavaScript because of how complex it is and like how much of a bad rap it gets in Rails, the Rails community. But I think if it was simpler, like there's a lot of wins we could get without having to throw Rails out, throw server-side rendered web pages out. Like JavaScript is really powerful. So yeah, I would like to see some of that complexity decrease.
And I don't understand how the conversation swayed to, oh, we should get rid of Rails because JavaScript is so great. That boggles my mind to this day. Like, why did we choose JavaScript over Rails? Like, why did people want this single page app so bad? I don't understand.
I think a lot of people already know JavaScript. Definitely more people know JavaScript than know Ruby. And I think they felt very empowered pretty quickly because they weren't having to learn a new thing. They were just building full apps with the language they already knew. And Node definitely contributed to that as well, because then it gave people who knew JavaScript a server-side language. And not only that, but you had massive corporations putting time and money and people behind V8 and things like that. And so like JavaScript just kind of blew up really fast. I understand how it got there, but I read a lot of articles even last week about how that pendulum swung so far and now it's starting to kind of swing back. But that's just my take on it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value to removing the context switching of JavaScript on the front end and Ruby on the back end or any other language and having the same thing on both sides like Meteor, promised way back in the day. That was an exciting idea just because then you can think the same way in both places. And I think there's a lot of value to that. But yeah, the JavaScript stuff is fascinating. The language and the browser support was like so disparate and so bad. And jQuery tried to smooth it over. But then as people were moving away from it, it was like, okay, I'm going to build the tiniest JavaScript package for this one teeny tiny feature. And then you uninstall something and it's a million packages. And a lot of things that the philosophy is different, where in Ruby, we like to build it into the language or active support, a central place. But in the browser, you can't merge that into Internet Explorer and Chrome and Safari. And these are not all open source things that are running your JavaScript, which makes it a lot tougher. And you end up with a very disconnected community in a way because of that, I think. And then the philosophy that Rails has had of convention over configuration is the opposite of what you see in Webpack land. It's definitely configuration over convention because every single thing when Webpack came out, I was like, yeah, I'm interested in that. But every tutorial was like, here, let's spend 30 minutes writing our own custom config for Webpack. And I was like, that sounds horrible. Why can't you just have a couple defaults that are easy to change if people want to undo those things, And that, I think, does not help anyone get productive fast. You want to be able to drop in and things work kind of as expected unless they were changed on purpose. And if you got to write your configs from scratch every time, everybody's going to do it differently, which is not great. It is not good.
That is part of the reason I stay away from it. I built some stuff using like Create React App because that's like, a set of defaults. But even then, they give you the option to eject out of Create React App. And you're like all of a sudden exposed to all these config files and you're in control of them. And like part of my legitimate like OCD is I like having a set of rules to follow. And honestly, sometimes if Rails was more strict, I'd be okay with that. But yeah, that's why I love convention over configuration is it's kind of like the same reason why I like linters and things like standard that automatically format code prettier, because I don't really want to think about the other stuff. I don't really want to think about how to configure. I just want to solve the problem, have the computer do some work for me and keep going.
I want to talk about that and I don't because I can't talk about that right now. But yes, why would you want to spend time in code review nitpicking over the fact that I like guard clauses and Chris doesn't, when at the end of the day, there's a robot that will do it. And if I can write the code, however I want to write the code and I hit save and then it's the code that the team likes, that's awesome for me. I love that.
I just want to object and say that I do like guard clauses.
I do too.
I don't want that out in the world that I don't like guard clauses.
Yeah, that is.
I may have a lot of nested if statements, but
Dang, wanted to clear that up quickly.
Yeah, you can't do that to me, man. Put me on blast like that.
Hey, man. I mean, Haml, dude.
Wrong.
Oh, yeah, you're gonna start telling rumors that we love Haml.
Dude, how did you know what I was doing all morning? I'm building a video about you and Jason and Andrew Famera. It's called Exposed. The real Hamlites.
Are you really including us in this video?
Oh, absolutely. And it's literally just random pictures I found of you guys online. And I just put like the Haml logo in the background. And I'm like, exposed.
Like fake tattoos on us. And
yeah.
I think You can see it very vaguely, the Haml tattoo on Jason's forehead.
It's written in clear ink. So
it's glow in the dark.
Yeah.
My friend had a blacklight tattoo.
Oh, that's cool.
That's cool.
There you go.
I'm gonna take this conversation and it's going in the movie. Jason and Chris privately admitting that they are secretly in love with Haml. Although, admittedly, I picked up a Haml file yesterday. And I was like, I don't really remember how to write this. And
bingo,
more of that.
Bingo, ding, 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 ding.
Hey man, I agree with you. I'm just at this point, I gotta be something on the show.
Well,
I mean, what? Like, I make awesome puns. I think that's kind of what I'm trying to transition to. And that's why I want everyone out there to try Honey Badger. And I'm not really sure why you wouldn't, because we're talking about tools that are changing, tools that are potentially breaking, and uncertainty in the world and uncertainty with, what's going to happen. And Babel is just going to keep pouring more features in that are never, ever, ever going to get into the language. And Honey Badger is like, hey man, I got your back. I'm going to watch out for you. You go over there and you doom scroll. Don't worry, everything's tight over here. If the site goes down, I got you back. If your cron's messed up, I got you back. Honey Badger's got your back. So go use Honey Badger. And if you don't, the Hamlites will descend.
All three of us.
Speaking of cron monitoring, man, I had a couple people this week that were like, my cron jobs don't seem to be running. And the first thought I had was, you need to be using Honey Badger and making them check in, because I don't know why cron is so hard to simulate, but it's such a pain when you have to go in and you're like, well, I can run the command manually and it works, but I don't know if I put it in cron and it doesn't seem to do it. That stuff is a pain in the butt. And man, there's a lot of tools that don't have that. They'll do error monitoring or one thing, but not cron monitoring, which is the whole thing that you can check and make sure your website gives you a 200 all the time. That's not so bad. You need that, but there's lots of users that will probably email you. But the cron, if it doesn't run, that is critical. Yeah, that was fresh on my mind earlier this week as I was, yay, it's Monday. I got to go debug cron for people. And I was like, just sign up for Honey Badger. Save so much time.
Yeah, save your time, save their time. And I guess I haven't said this, but I will. I am changing companies, and I was super freaking hyped because, dude, I'm going back to Honey Badger land. They use Honey Badger. I'm going back, dude. I'm excited. You know why? Because I'm freaking sick of running my freaking RSpec test and getting a failure because of a freaking tool that is supposed to be watching my production build. Why am I getting this error here? And Honey Badger don't do that. Honey Badger don't care.
Yeah, totally. Well, I guess we should wrap up here probably. I was going to talk a little bit about the Rails 6.1 features that came out in the release candidate, but we went down a pretty good path of what it's like building a community and how you do that. So I think we should make that a topic for next episode.
Yeah, I've been wanting to talk about what I've been working on my side project for 3 weeks now. And every time before we start, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to talk about this. And we never talk about it. So that's on my docket.
We'll make a strategic point to do that next week.
I don't have anything mind-blowing to share. I just need my remote Ruby therapy session.
Dude, I want to share this with the people. All right. I think there's a lot of misdirected anger right now. And I think this anger should be directed at Babel, because Babel, I got very strong feelings about this. All right. Babel was a mistake, and it continues to create just this monster of disunity in the JavaScript community.
I feel like MSNBC cutting Trump off yesterday. I feel like we should just cut Andrew right now. I feel like he's got a lot of rage.
Well, dude, because while y'all were all watching that, I was writing Webpack config. Yes, I am rage. I'm enraged about the state of the Babel and the Babel.
Andrew, I love you so much.
I appreciate that, dude. I'm hard to love, dude. I've been told that.
It's because of the Haml.
It's because of the Haml. Oh no.
Oh gosh. I guess that's where we should wrap it up.
Andrew likes Haml.
See ya.
See ya.
Bye.